We're going to start our service in just a moment. I want to invite everybody, of course, to please silence your cell phones, anything that might distract us today. Let's just get quiet for a moment as we prepare ourselves to honor and to say goodbye to our extraordinary teacher and friend. Our tradition includes some incredible stories about visionary leaders, people who somehow, some way could see into the future, people who could visualize what others could scarcely imagine, and then through sheer force of will, make those dreams real. Above the ark in this sanctuary, right there, is a text from Genesis 28, from the story of Jacob's vision of the ladder connecting heaven and earth. When Jacob wakes from his dream, he realizes that he has been in the presence of the Holy One, and he says, Achen, Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh va'anochi lo yadati. Indeed, God was in this place, but I didn't realize it. And then, filled with reverence, he he says, Ma nora hamakom hazeh, ein zeh ki im beit Adonai, v'zeh sha'ar hashamayim. How awesome is this place? This is none other than God's abode, the gateway to heaven. Ma nora hamakom hazeh. How awesome, how extraordinary is this place, this Beit Knesset, this synagogue, these B'tei Sefer, our schools, this Beit Kehillah, our community. And all of these things, every one of them, were part of the vision of the extraordinary man we gather today to remember. The man who dreamed these things into being. It is awesome. It is extraordinary. It is amazing. Ma nora. And ultimately, it's not what made Rabbi Isaiah Zeldin great. Not the 18 acres on this beautiful mountain, not the 1 million cubic yards of dirt that were excavated to lower the hilltop 50 feet, not the tens of millions of dollars he raised, not the way he worked with the board, the way he worked the board. Not the number of students or congregants. Those are all nice stories. They're engaging anecdotes and indeed impressive achievements. And they brought him delight, to be sure. But they're not his legacy. And they do not add up to the sum of his greatness. What was amazing, what was extraordinary, what was Norah about Shai Zeldin? Well, if you had the good fortune to know the man, to spend time with him, to be in his presence, you understand. His warmth, his humor, his uncanny ability to make you feel known and cared for, appreciated, his heart. The Talmud teaches us, Rachmana libe bai, God wants our hearts. And oh, how Shai Zeldin shared his with us. I didn't have the chance to work with Rabbi Zeldin when he was still a regular part of the life of this congregation. But I did get to spend some wonderful time with him on my visits to his home in Palm Desert. And I tried to speak with him on the phone every few weeks. I'd update him about the synagogue and our schools. Sometimes I'd mention a congregant to him whom I had recently seen. And Shai would more often than not ask me about that person's spouse by name, or maybe about their children. He'd recall what the person did for a living, maybe tell me the story of a project that they'd worked on together at the temple. These were people, some of whom he hadn't seen in years, but he knew them. He really knew them. And it was so obvious to me that he loved them. He loved this community with every fiber of his being. He described you to me as the friendliest and most supportive congregants imaginable. Shai loved this congregation, but his love wasn't limited to Stephen Wise Temple alone. He loved the Jewish people. He loved Jewish education, especially day schools. He loved Torah and our tradition, and he loved Israel with an eyes wide open passion. His love was expansive, overflowing. He told me once that he insisted that the bylaws of the congregation never limit membership to Jews alone, as many other congregations do. He said that anyone who wants to be part of our mission, anyone who wants to be part of our good work, should be welcomed with open arms. He loved taking care of people. He loved being there for your baby namings and weddings and bar and bat mitzvahs. And he found great meaning and great satisfaction in being there for you at difficult times as well. His love was norah. It was awesome, tremendous, endless. And there was, if we are to be honest, a healthy portion of self-love in him as well. He loved quoting his father on Proverbs 27, which says, Yehalel chazar velo picha. The psalmist teaches us you should let another person praise you. You shouldn't praise yourself with your own mouth. But he would reread this creatively as, let another person praise you, and if not, if he doesn't praise you, then picha. You should use your own mouth to praise yourself. Shai had extraordinary confidence. He told me once that he never considered any program idea, any vision he had, he never considered the possibility that it could fail. He knew that with hard work, with his talent, he would achieve his goals. But his self-love never, ever would have been experienced as narcissism or as arrogance. The truth is, Rabbi Shai Zeldin was one of the most lovable people on this earth. How could he not love himself? And as much love as he had for his community, his main focus was squarely on his family. When we were together, we'd always spend time talking temple business, but then we'd get to the real accomplishments that mattered to him, his family. Shai's love for you was so obvious in every interaction I had with him. He would speak about you, Joel and Michael, about your spouses, Karen and Terry, about his beloved grandchildren, Sivan and Igor, Sasha and Dustin, Oren and Noga, Gabe and Noam. And he would speak with utter joy about his greatest pride, the next generation, his great-grandchildren, Eitan, Ilan, Alina, Liam, Stav, Evan, and Ido. He was so proud of you, not just for your accomplishments, but of the people, the Minches that you are. He told me how lucky he was to have had Florence in his life, a partner, an Ezer Kenegdo, someone whose wise counsel he admired and respected, and she was always there, sitting right back there, to support him and to be honest with him. His sermons were spectacular, but if one fell flat, it was Florence who would point it out. Shai told me on one of my visits, I once gave a sermon that wasn't so very good. Florence said to me, well, you can't win them all. And if one of his jokes from the Bima was a bit too spicy, she'd give him a look, letting him know it was time to knock it off. Shai devoted so much of his life to the community he built, to the children in the schools he loved so dearly, and to the staff that he was so very proud of. And he told me once that the devotion was all-consuming. I asked him, how'd you do it, Shai? How'd you raise all that money? How'd you build all those buildings? This campus, the high school, how'd you do it? He said, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then Florence and I would go to dinner with congregants, building relationships. And yet he told me, despite the toil, despite the many evenings out, the family knew that they were first, that they were his highest priority. On behalf of a grateful community, we are thankful to you, Shai's family, for sharing your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather with us. You're surrounded by many hundreds of people here and viewing this online who are grateful to you, whose lives were changed because of Isaiah Zeldin. Thank you for sharing him so generously with us. The Zohar, the great text of Jewish mysticism, helps us understand what that word norah in the text above our ark means. What is awesomeness? The word can be so overused as to be rendered meaningless. Says the Zohar, B'chol atar dahave shlemut hashechiach, ikare norah. Wherever you find completeness in the world, shlemut, it is described as awesome, norah. What is truly awesome, what is truly norah, is a complete life, a life that is shalem, whole. Shai told many of us that his goal for longevity was 100 years. He wanted to be there physically for Eitan's bar mitzvah. And Eitan, and for that matter, all of the great-grandchildren who are here, know this: he will be there. He will be there with you and with us, always, in our memories, in the values he taught us, in the stories he told that we will keep telling, and most of all, in the love that we feel. He wanted 100 years. He got 97 and a half. He got to see the fourth generation. He got to see people he loved grow and develop and thrive. You want the definition of shlemut, of completeness? He had the zechut, he had the merit to see his great-grandchildren learning in the Hebrew immersion program designed by his granddaughter in the day school he founded. My last conversation with Shai was earlier this month when I saw him in Palm Desert. It was a fulfilling career, he said to me. It really was. Shlemut, complete. And then he spoke these words to me, the last I was able to hear. He said, Yoshi, I appreciate your visit. Thank you. But I'm exhausted now. He was tired, and his work was complete. And now his journey on this earth is almost over. Today we will accompany our teacher, our dreamer, our visionary, on his final path to his place of eternal rest. With deep respect, with all the kavod we can muster, and this is his greatness and his true legacy, with hearts filled with love. We will do one last physical act for Shai. Manorah, how holy, how beautiful, how awesome. Manorah, how shalem, how complete was this life, how consistent and how whole. His devotion to his family, his devotion to his community, his love for his people and for humanity. It's true that his accomplishments were legend. But what should fill us with awe, what should inspire us, is his heart, his love, his desire to care for others, his ability to balance family and career, his uncanny ability to know people and for them to feel known by him, to love them and to be loved in return. Holy One of blessing, we offer you our thanks. With hearts filled with awe, with gratitude, and with love, we ask that you lay him down in peace. May his soul be bound up forever in our lives. Reading of memory that Rabbi Zeldin and Florence especially liked. When the moment comes to close my eyes on this beautiful planet, my heart will thank and honor all those who gave me life and the warmth of love, and God, who permitted me to devote my earthly sojourn to peace, justice, and the betterment of the human condition. I will go in peace and joy, thankful for having been blessed with the miracle of life. I have loved my life with passion, embraced it with fervor, cherished every single moment of it. I have contemplated with wonder the sky and its running clouds, my brethren, the humans, my sisters, the flowers and the stars. I have feasted unceasingly on the treasure of life in all its forms. I have not dwelled in mediocre ambitions, vain hatred, and useless complaints. My conclusions, therefore, are: decide to be happy, render others happy, proclaim your joy, love passionately your miraculous life, be grateful for every moment of life, pray and thank God every day, meditate, smile, laugh, whistle, sing, dance, look at fascination at everything. Fill your lungs and heart with liberty. Be yourself fully and immensely. Feel God in your body, mind, heart, and soul, and be convinced of eternal life. The words of the psalmist, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Mizmor David, Adonai roi, lo echsar, binoteshe yarbitzeini, al mei menuchot yenahaleini, nafshi yeshovev yancheini v'maglei tzedek, leman shemo, gam ki elech begeitz al mavet, lo irara. Ki ata imadi, shiftecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni, taroch lefanai, shulchan neged sorerai, dishanta vashemen roshi. Kosi revaya, ach tov achesed, yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, veshaveti beveit Adonai,
We invite Sivan and Gabe to share words representing Rabbi Zeldin's grandchildren.
Well, to everyone in this room, he was Rabbi Zeldin, or Shy. To Sivan and I, he was Grandpa.
We've been thinking about the legacy that Grandpa Shai has left the 15 of us, his grandchildren and our spouses and his great-grandchildren. Noam has inherited Grandpa Shai's love of stories and storytelling.
My sister Sasha, it was her appreciation for education.
Oren has Grandpa's love of basketball.
And for Sivan, his fluency with words.
And Gabe's the only one lucky enough to get Grandpa Shai's ability to solve puzzles and his miraculous ability to speak without any notes.
I tried, but he was the real legend at it, and we saw him speak for hours at a time sometimes without a single note. Or if he had a note, he would never look at it. And it was remarkable. And I think we both, starting with Sivan, have some words about that.
To start, I want to pay him tribute by telling you all about the greatest legacy that he left us, and at the same time, sharing with all of you his not-so-secret trick for delivering lengthy sermons without even a scrap of paper to refer to. I'll start with fun. Grandpa Shai was a fun-loving man with many hobbies. Chief among those was golf. Each of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren learned from a young age the joy of riding in Grandpa Shai's golf cart, and we greatly anticipated the day when we actually got to learn to drive it. Golf cart driving lessons with Grandpa Shai functioned much like a personality test. For the daredevil, Oren, or vigilant, Sasha, among us would be brought to the fore at the moment that Grandpa Shai said, "It's time to put your foot on the gas pedal." Golf was a mirror of Grandpa Shai's own personality, and he spent countless hours with Gabe and with Oren on the golf course, teaching them about golf and about patience. Yet each time he himself made a bad shot, he would chastise himself with, "Come on, Zeldin." That's a line that he also used when playing chess, another one of his hobbies. When I was a child and broke to him the sad news that I did not share his love of golf, he quickly pivoted and tried to teach me chess. Alas, I was never the chess partner that he sought. After all, he was a ranked chess player. But Eitan was patient enough to learn the chess moves that I never could, and together they spent long afternoons hunched over the chessboard. Grandpa also loved talking philosophy, and for that he found a wonderful companion in Noam. They would go on long walks and discuss politics, theology, and theories on how to live a good life. I was never privy to those conversations, but whatever they settled on clearly worked. Admiring. Grandpa Shai had the opportunity to meet with a lot of dignitaries over his life. If you looked at the pictures of Grandpa Shai with the Dalai Lama, or Grandpa Shai with President Clinton, or Grandpa Shai with Prime Minister Shamir, or Prime Minister Rabin, you might think, in comparison with them, what have I accomplished? But that's not how Grandpa Shai saw it. He looked at each of his grandchildren, and especially his great-grandchildren, and he believed them to be highly accomplished people. To him, Alina merited a place in the Guinness Book of World Records for her boundless energy. Stav and Ido warranted Mensa membership because even as babies they were bilingual. Evan deserved a gold medal in curiosity, and the way that he quelled over the fact that Eitan and Ilan were enrolled as students at Wise School, only the best for the best, and that Liam was part of the Hebrew immersion program of the Wise ECC, another brilliant Hebrew speaker, in his eyes, these accomplishments were just as important as those of heads of state. Munificent, meaning more generous than is usual or necessary. This perfectly describes our grandfather, who wanted nothing more than for everyone around him to be happy, and who was willing to give whatever he had to make our happiness possible. Anything up to half my kingdom, he would say, quoting the book of Esther. And then he'd put a bill or check in our hand to make sure that we had enough to cover the plane fare or the gas money we had spent to come visit him, not wanting us to be put out even for the pleasure of his own company. Grandpa Shai was also generous with his attention. Whenever you would come to a Friday night service that he led, at the end of the service there would be a long line of people queuing up to speak with him. But if we, his grandchildren, were at the service, no matter how long the line and no matter who was in it, he would make a point of saying hello to us first. He made time for everyone, but he made sure that we knew that we were a priority. Inclusive. When I was in preschool, Grandpa Shai came to visit my class one day. I ran up to him, according to family lore, and threw my arms around him and said, "I love you, Grandpa Shai." My childhood friend Lisa Lewis, who also always called him Grandpa Shai, followed suit and threw her arms around him and said, "I love you, Grandpa Shai." And then, thinking that it was social protocol, the entire class of preschool children ran up to him, throwing their arms around his legs and said, "We love you, Grandpa Shai." Now, to a casual observer, it might seem strange that a room full of children would call the senior rabbi Grandpa. But to anyone who knew him well, it was clear that while he was our grandfather, he was willing and able to include others as his grandchildren as well. To my maternal cousins, Mason, Justin, and Sawyer Kroll, and to our friend Max Borenstein, he was never anything other than Grandpa Shai. When Igor and Dusty and Noga each joined the family, he considered them grandchildren on equal footing with those who had been in the family for a long time. With each of these grandchildren, he shared the special Grandpa Shai kiss. A kiss on the right cheek, then one on the left, and then one on the forehead. Lesson of the day. When we were children, Grandpa Shai always gave us a lesson of the day, though in truth, he tended to recycle the same 3. 1, eat your fruits and vegetables. Then he'd say, "What do you call a 100-year-old man who has eaten broccoli every day of his life?" Old. 2, always remember the rule of 72. Now, for those of you who never had a Grandpa Shai lesson or a financial advisor, divide 72 by the interest rate of your investment, and presto, that's how long it will take your money to double. 3, learn to love to do the things you have to do. Well, this was Grandpa Shai's most profound lesson. It was also a reminder of lesson 1, eat your fruits and vegetables. Because it turns out that while Grandpa Shai ate broccoli every single day, what do you call a man who eats broccoli for 97 years? He did not, in fact, actually like broccoli. As we got older, or maybe just as he got older, the lessons of the day began to hearken back to his own childhood as a yeshiva bacher. So Rabbi Yoshi already told you. He would say, "Yehalalucha acherim velo picha," let others praise you, and not your own mouth. And then he would say, "Yehalalucha acherim velo picha," let others praise you, and if not, your own mouth. Or he'd teach, "Tov chaver karov me'ach rachok," it's better to have a nearby friend than a faraway brother. But then he'd insist, no. Tov chaver karov, me'ach rachok. It's good to have a nearby friend, but that is far from having a brother. And he loved his brothers, Jack and Bernie, with all of his heart. For this last one, yadada, I'm going to need Cantor Emma's help. Because Cantor Emma is going to share with us Grandpa Shai's favorite nigun. This is the song that Grandpa Shai sang to each of his grandchildren, and well he could, his great-grandchildren when we were babies. Grandpa Shai had a magical way with babies, and he would whisk away a fussy or an overtired baby and sing this nigun over and over again until the baby fell asleep. For us, his grandchildren, this nigun will always carry Grandpa Shai's love and a sense of serenity. Put it all together. F for fun, A for admiring, M for munificent, I for inclusive, L for his lesson of the day, and Y for the yadada of his nigun. F-A-M-I-L-Y. That was Grandpa Shai's trick for speaking from the bima without notes. He'd always come up with a mnemonic, and he'd spell his way through his sermons. And that is the greatest legacy that he left us. He always said that with all of the buildings that he built, with all of the institutions that he founded, with all of the programs that he created, his family was his greatest legacy. Thank you, Grandpa Shai.
He certainly loved his mnemonic devices. He also loved to start his public speaking with a joke. Of course, over the years, as he changed, his jokes changed too. So did their level of appropriateness. So I'll take one from about 10 years ago. Not surprisingly, it's about a man in his 80s playing golf. The golfer slices one off the tee, walks after the ball. He's looking for his ball in the woods, and he hears a voice. Psst, over here. He looks around, doesn't see anybody, keeps looking for his ball. A little while later, he hears the voice again. Hey, down here. So he looks down, and he sees a frog. And the frog looks up at the golfer and says, if you kiss me, I'll turn into a beautiful princess. So the man bends down, picks up the frog, but doesn't kiss it. He sticks the frog in his pocket and starts walking back to his golf cart. The frog looks up at him and says, what's the matter? You're not going to kiss me? The man says, listen, at my age, I'd rather have a talking frog. That might have been one of the ones that he told on the golf course. So we all knew his public speaking, but I'd venture a guess that everyone in here also knows and has come to appreciate his private speaking. Because for each and every one of us, he had a way of addressing us individually, particularly when we needed it most. And whether it was in his office right there, at his house, at your house, at a restaurant, it didn't matter where. He always knew the right words to say. And for us in his family, I know we would always come to him whenever we had any dilemmas. For me, most recently, I was in a job. I wanted to look for a new job. I wasn't sure whether to stay in the job or not when I was looking. There was no question who to talk to. I came to him. He didn't have to think about it at all. He said, Gabe, keep your job, look for another job. Because if you don't, you'll take the first job opportunity that comes because you'll really want something. It's better to be patient. And the minute he said it, I knew that it was right. And he always had the right advice at the right time and never had to think about it. For my sister Sasha, she had a situation that she talked to him about, and he repeated some words from his father, like Rabbi Oshi said. He said, when in life you run into an obstacle, jump over it. If you can't jump over it, crawl under it. And if you can't crawl under it, go around. And that's really how he led his life, isn't it? So while we're up here speaking, I hope that you all will take a moment as well to reflect upon the private conversations and the private speaking that he was so masterful at. At this point, I think you're going to hear from his two sons, Michael and Joel, next. So I'll invite Michael up to start.
Rabbi Yoshi spoke of shlemut, and looking around at so many of you that I've known for so many years and who knew my father for so many decades, this really is an awesome moment. You'll hear echoes of Sivan and Gabe's stories. I guess that's because we're all in the same family and we have much the same thing to say. And Yoshi and Ailey and Nate are part of the family, so I'm sure there'll be echoes there as well. I'm going to start when my father's father died. Because when my grandfather, Moshe Ephraim, was preparing for his death, he looked around at his things and he says, I want to give something to each of my grandchildren that's right for that grandchild. My cousin David used to go to shul with him, so he gave David his talit and tefillin. Joel, he knew that Joel would never have to hawk his gold watch. Joel had the gold watch, it was safe forever. And me, I received his Vilna Shas, his 1896 publication of the entire Talmud, because I guess he knew that I was the only one who would have the kind of deep appreciation of the Jewish learning it contained. My father didn't give me wisdom in books. He gave me wisdom in the way he lived his life and what I saw of him. One of the things that he taught me by the way he lived is in fact from a Masechet in the Talmud, Masechet Kiddushin. A father is obligated with regard to his son to circumcise him. Check. To redeem him if he is the firstborn son and must be redeemed by payment to a priest. We'll have to ask Joel about that one. To teach him Torah. Check. To advise him in finding a life partner. Check for 30 wonderful years with Leah. And for 10 years and counting, 10 terrific years and counting with Terry. To teach him a trade. Check for encouraging me to pursue my passion for Jewish education. And some say a father is also obliged to teach his son to swim. Check, but I can barely make it from one end of the pool to the other. But there are many other lessons I learned from him, not from the Talmud, but as I say, from observing the man that he was. So what stands out more than anything, Sivan referred to, is his generosity. As you can imagine, the tuition to the schools that he started is rather steep. The schools have generous scholarship policies that he established from the very beginning. But in addition to the official scholarships, he made it possible for so many children to attend the school. I was always impressed that his stance was no rabbi, no Jewish educator, no Jewish communal professional should ever not be able to send his or her child to the school because they were serving the Jewish people. And he made it possible for so many of their children to attend the school. For the last few years, I would drive out to see him every week or two, and he would always insist on giving me gas money. So I always told him, you know, I don't really need that, Dad. And he said, I'm doing it for me, not for you. But he really thought he was doing it for me. I knew that the end was close when a few weeks ago he stopped offering me gas money. I also learned a lot about leadership from watching my father. For 15 years, I was in academic administration in the schools of education at the Hebrew Union College. In talking with Joel this week, I realized that my style emulated his in a very important way. I learned from him idealistic pragmatism. He always had big visions, though many people have asked, oh, did he envision what the temple would become from the very beginning? And he always said, no, I had no idea. But each step along the way, he had a vision. First a pool, then a nursery school, a day school, a high school. He always had these lofty visions, even ones like the high school that people repeatedly told him he could not do. And the way he did them was to take all the practical steps that were necessary to achieve the great vision. I remember him speaking at the dedication of one of the buildings, and he talked about Jacob's ladder, with one end of it firmly on the ground and the other high in the heavens. That's how I picture him, climbing up and down that ladder between sky-high visions and the daily realities of life. And that's how I tried to emulate him as I created a slew of new programs to prepare the next generation of Jewish educators. I also learned values from my father, and as you heard from Sivan, chief among them was family. Despite all the programs he started and the buildings he built, he often said that his family was his proudest legacy. I too am most proud of my family, my children, Sivan and Igor, Oren and Noga, Noam, my grandchildren, Eitan and Ilan, and Liam and Stav and Ido. And my family would not be complete had Terry not come into my life to share with me his love, his gentle demeanor, and his deep spiritual wisdom. As is obvious to anybody who knew my father, his other chief values were a passion for Jewish education and a dedication to Israel. But he built this temple on the foundation of another value that was near and dear to him, and that was the value of welcoming everyone into Judaism. One of the legendary features of the early years of the temple was that there was a limit on membership. Everybody knows about the original 35 families, but then there was a limit. Oh, we're going to be an intimate community. Let's have 250 families and then we'll stop. Until the membership reached 250, and he couldn't imagine keeping Jews out. So, okay, we'll have 400 or 500, and then they reached that limit. And he couldn't keep Jews out, and he raised the limit again and again and again. He was proud that this temple welcomed Jews of all backgrounds, and especially of all national origins. And he was particularly proud that the temple did not turn away couples and families if one of the parents was not Jewish. Few people know that in 1973, the Reform movement was deciding whether to allow children born of a Jewish father but not a Jewish mother to be considered Jewish, even though the tradition says you have to be born of a Jewish mother to be Jewish. Well, he was invited to serve on the committee that was making the recommendation about what the policy should be. And he told me that he was invited on the committee because they thought that he, as the son of a devout Orthodox Jewish educator, would of course take the side of tradition. And guess what? He surprised them and was the chief advocate for what became known as patrilineal descent. Later on, while other temples were debating whether non-Jews could participate in services from the bima, he welcomed the non-Jewish partner to bless their children at a bar or bat mitzvah, to sing from the bima, and to give their children a talit. And most important of all the things I learned from my father was to do everything with gusto and enthusiasm and energy. He and I shared a favorite verse from Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes. See, the main character, Kohelet, goes on a search for the meaning of life. And he finds that meaning is not to be found in pursuing pleasures or wealth or even learning. All of these are vanities, hevel havalim. Kohelet and my father came to the conclusion that even if it's not possible to find ultimate meaning, we can give life everything that we've got. Kol asher timtza yadcha la'asot, b'kochacha aseh. Whatever you set out to do it with all your might. And that's a lesson that has always guided me in everything I have done. So, Dad, what did I learn from you? I learned to give to those that I love, and I learned to give my life to service with generosity, G, with idealistic pragmatism, I, with values, V, and everything, E. G-I-V-E, give. Dad, you gave so much to me and to all of us gathered here. What do I give to you in return? My appreciation, my gratitude, and most important, my love. I love you, Dad.
Some years ago, my wife Karen and I visited our parents when they lived at Cassiano around the corner. And we walked in, and Karen saw a picture of my dad with the Dalai Lama. And she went over to my mom and said, I know what I want for my next birthday present. I want a picture of Shai and the Dalai Lama. So my mom dutifully took it out to a framing store in the valley and got it framed. And when it was ready, Karen went out to pick it up. And you know how when you go to the framing store to pick up a frame, they take that brown paper off and they show you what they've got there. So the woman who was running the framing store did that. And Karen points to the picture and says, you know who that is, don't you? And she says, yeah, that's Rabbi Zeldin. But I don't know who that other fellow is in the bathrobe. A number of years ago, I was watching the presidential debate. It was maybe 5 or 6 cycles ago, and someone asked one of the candidates, who are your heroes? And this candidate, who wasn't elected, had no idea what to say. He was like a deer in the headlights, complete blank. So the debate finished, and I thought to myself, I don't ever want to be caught like that. I better ask myself, who are my heroes? So I thought about it. And I came up with Jackie Robinson, JFK, and my dad, in the reverse order, though. Politicians talk, or at least until recently, politicians used to talk about family values. Well, they stole that idea from my old man. He used to talk about Jewish family values, and that was what he taught us. He taught us to tell the truth and to always keep our promises. When I was 7 and we lived in Brooklyn, he was offered the job to come out to Los Angeles to found the Hebrew Union College here, and I didn't want to go, and I was 7 and I was stubborn. And my dad reasoned with me, and it didn't work. And finally he said, look, if you move out there, I promise you within 3 years, the Dodgers will be in Los Angeles. And within 3 years, almost to the day, well, you know where they are, and they've been ever since. So I had great faith in him. I knew I could trust him. So, like Gabe said, I went to him for advice, and he gave me advice, and it was usually pretty good. And he even gave me advice sometimes when I didn't go to him. He taught us integrity. Money's not the most important thing. He never asked for money for himself. He asked for money for the temple, and he asked for money for Israel without shame, but never anything for himself. He taught us generosity, as has been alluded to several times today. He was generous to a fault. He couldn't say no. And he was particularly good with families in the temple, and when their children had difficulties, he would always get involved fully and gladly. And I remember one time when I came home from college, and he brought a kid over who I knew, who was my contemporary, who had come home from Berkeley, where he came back with some really anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist attitudes. And his parents, who had been longtime members of the temple, were beside themselves. So they arranged for this young man to come over to our house, and my dad sat and talked with him. My dad brought me in because I knew the kid, and it was okay with the kid. And my dad talked with him for 2 hours, and they talked about every logical argument about why this was wrong or that was wrong, and it was back and forth. And at the end of the 2 hours, the young man says to my father, "Rabbi, I really appreciate the time you've spent with me. Your arguments make a lot of sense, but they just don't persuade me. Is there one more thing, if you had only one thing to tell me, that you'd like to leave me with?" My dad thought for a minute, looked him in the eye, and said, "This above all, to thine own self be true." And that always stuck with me. My father taught us fairness and social justice. I remember when he was at Temple Emmanuel in the early 60s, and the state legislature had passed the Rumford Fair Housing Act. It made illegal discrimination on the basis of race in housing. And there was a big controversy about it, and the people who didn't like that law put an initiative on the ballot. It was called Proposition 14. So there was a big movement, the counter movement, No on 14. So at Temple Emmanuel, my dad got up one Friday night and he talked about this subject, and he said, "It's a moral imperative to vote no on 14. Well, he had a number of builders in the congregation who weren't too fond of his position. So the board called him in and they said, "Rabbi, from now on, we want you to submit your sermons to us for our approval." And my dad said, it didn't take him very long, he said, "Well, first of all, I don't write my sermons out. But if I did, I wouldn't be giving them to you anyway." So they fired him. And that's when he and 35 families formed Stephen S. Wise, named after his hero. All those stories are not to say that my dad was always easygoing. He was a very strict disciplinarian with Michael and me, and I felt more with me. But I remember being in New York visiting my grandparents one Passover, and he had this idea that I was going to say the 4 questions in Hebrew, and I had this idea that I was going to go out and play baseball. So the rule was I could play baseball after I demonstrated to him that I had memorized the 4 questions in Hebrew. Now, Karen wrote him a letter, which I saved for a special occasion. I had no idea what it would be. But she wrote this on Father's Day in 2004. And I just want to read you a paragraph out of it because it's so appropriate. She says, "Shai, you've been a father to me for 35 years. It would now be 50. And there are no words to express my gratitude for your opening your heart and your hearth all that time. I have felt your love and want you to know how much it has meant to me. You're a husband, father, and grandfather of substance, and now great-grandfather of substance. Most important, you're a preacher who actually practices what he preaches. What more could I and your fortunate family ask for? Dad, you were always a great role model. If I could have chosen a father, you would have been the one. Karen, Sasha, Gabe, and I love you very much, and we're very proud of your life. I just want to say a few special thanks, though. I want to thank Jay Shapira, his doctor from Cedars-Sinai, who I think kept him alive twice through cardiology procedures. His doctor in the desert, Joe Scherger, who's been his friend for 10 years, has taken such a special interest in his case and was always there. Joe is the one who set his goal to keep my dad alive until the bar mitzvah, which was a 10-year period. He says, I achieved 75% of my goal. That was, I want to thank the friends from the desert who came in a bus. You've been his sustenance and his community these years, and he and we are very grateful to you. I want to thank the caregivers. I want to thank Fred and Tina, Booty, Monica, and Diana, Nurse Diana. They're truly angels of mercy. And I want to thank Ailey, Yoshi, and Nate, and the entire temple staff, not just for their assistance in this event, and through the illness, but for all those years. Anyway, Dad, thank you for everything.
Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid ki mimini bal emot lachein samach libi vayagel kevodi af besari yishkon lavetach ki lo tazov nafshi lishol lo titen chasidcha lirot shachat todieini ora קיוויתי אדוני לנגדי תמיד, כי מימיני בוא אמות.
One of the extraordinary experiences over the many years together was that it didn't matter what it was that we might be doing in any given moment or what might be happening either in the world or in our personal lives. Shai always had a story for that moment, and they came to him just in a flash. He didn't have to prepare. It was there. So this morning, Bonnie and I were driving up the driveway and got to the crosswalk in front of the parking structure. And we had to stop at the crosswalk. And the reason we had to stop there was because there was a whole line of young mothers holding their little children, and they were walking over to the parenting center for a session. And I thought, this is it. There's not a lot more that we have to say. I'm going to say more, but walk around this campus, and there are potent and powerful visuals everywhere. The principal of our elementary school told me that this morning, early this morning, when school opened first thing, this sanctuary was filled. The entire elementary school was in here. How appropriate that they preceded us. And they were being told the story of Shai Zeldin and how someone creates something so extraordinary. So they created the pathway this morning for us. And then I remembered a story that Shai told me. It's easily 20 years ago, when I asked the same question that Michael and others had asked him, and that was, did you envision all of this? Did you know that one day all of this would exist on this mountaintop? I asked him that, and he said, are you kidding, Eli? There is no way that I could have imagined this. And then he told me about something that had happened just a few days before, when he and Florence were driving up Stephen Wise Drive at the beginning of the day, and they watched the children on their way to their classrooms. And he turned to Florence, whose Hebrew name was Tzipora, Tzip. He turned to Tzip and he said, pinch me, Tzip, pinch me. He himself could not have believed the truth of what he built. For all of us who were touched by his life in so many ways that are beyond measure and therefore also beyond words. For his family, his children and his grandchildren and great-grandchildren who gave unstintingly of their love and devotion and respect and care, whose hearts are today at one and the same time, both full and broken. And for those of us who were privileged, for those of us who knew daily the blessing of being his students, of being his partners, of being his friends, Shai, we knew that we could not have you forever. And we knew that it was time. And yet, Rabbi Isaiah Zeldin, also known as Dad and Grandpa Shai, died shortly after the sunset on Friday and the night of his final Shabbat descended. It was Shabbat B'Shalach, which may have been written, a Torah portion which may have been written with him in mind. B'Shalach recounts the dramatic story of our people's liberation from Egyptian bondage. Pursued by their enslavers, the Israelites stand at the sea, and it is for them a seemingly insurmountable barrier to their freedom and their future. Will the people, asks B'Shalach, will the people get to the other side, or will they remain forever enslaved? A number of years ago, Shai and I engaged in a precious conversation about his life and thought. And fortunately, it's all on a 2.5-hour video. And these are Shai's own words from that conversation about that moment in B'Shalach at the sea, when the stakes for the Jewish people could not have been any higher. And this is what he said. I've often cited the verse, he said to me, from the book of Exodus, where the Jews are leaving Egypt and Moses prays to God. And God says to him, Moses, this is not the time to pray to me. This is the time to move. Here's what that verse means, Shai continued. There are times for people to depend on God, but there are times for people to move. There are times for people to act. And this is it. This was his portion. This was how he lived and worked. Get moving, don't wait. Act in the world to transform it. Shai Zeldin knew so well the lessons of B'Shalach, lessons not only for him, lessons for the Jewish people. He knew the often painful lessons of Jewish history when we waited. When all that we did was pray. He knew that, as a Jew especially, you had to act. He grew up, in an Orthodox Judaism that he left behind. Here's what he said: I encourage Jews just to come to the synagogue. Even atheistic Jews, he said, it doesn't matter. Let them just come to services. They don't have to believe all the prayers that are in the prayer book. I don't. And then he looked straight into my eyes. He said, I don't, alien. You don't either. I didn't argue with him. He knew when to pray, but he was built for action. It was in his temperament, in his DNA. You want to get to the other side of the sea? Then don't wait around for it to split open. Jump into the water, start spinning, move forward, even when, no, especially, dafka, when others are reticent to move forward, then you move first. You lead. That's what he did. And it started, in his own accounting, when he was 13. When he was 13 years old, he became aware of Hitler's coming to power. And Shai went into Manhattan with his father because there was a giant protest march being led by Rabbi Stephen S. Wise. And this 13-year-old he was once a 13-year-old. This 13-year-old listened to Rabbi Wise, who spoke so powerfully against the dangers of the rising tide of Nazi anti-Semitism in Europe. It was then, he told me, it was then, Shai said, it was then and there that I decided that if that was what a rabbi could do, if you could be a rabbi like Stephen Wise and you could help the Jewish people, then I would become a rabbi. That was the defining moment, he told me. And right afterwards, he joined the Zionist youth organization Masada and started organizing rallies against the British refusal to allow the Jews to enter Palestine. There really is no end to the formative stories of those youthful years, and they're important. They're important, I think, to our understanding, certainly to my understanding of who our rabbi was. He was the son of Morris and Esther Zeldin, and brother to Jack and Bernie. And his father, Morris, was a master orator in both Yiddish and Hebrew, and he wrote in both of those languages for a huge daily readership. This was a man, his father, who insisted that before he would marry Esther, she had to become fluent in Hebrew. Can you imagine? And so Shai grew up fluent in Hebrew and in Yiddish. We all know that. We know that he was a masterful storyteller, and when there was a story about his father that he believed could teach us an important lesson, he loved sharing that story from this bima. And in one of those stories, he recounted what happened in the Orthodox world, and I tell you this because if it was important for him to tell it, then you knew that he wanted you to learn something from his telling. These weren't just mices. These were stories that had a teaching at their core. Not the racy ones so much, but they kept us entertained and they kept us paying attention. In one of those stories, Shai recounted what happened in the Orthodox world upon the publication of the Reconstructionist prayer book, whose theology represented a radical departure from the tradition. And in bitter response, he said, there were some Orthodox rabbis who actually held a book-burning ceremony in Brooklyn. And I remember how moved Shai was himself when he told that story in one of his sermons, because with great passion he quoted the scathing article that his Orthodox father wrote for the Yiddish newspapers, lambasting those rabbis, declaring, "Who burns books?" Jews never burn books. That's where he came from. And every time that he talked about the Jewish people, and especially when he spoke about Israel, as it's been noted from this pulpit, you were all here, you heard those sermons, you witnessed the fullness, and sometimes you witnessed the fierceness of his passion. And you knew that his story and the Jewish story were absolutely one. They were inseparable. That's what inspired me. That's why I wanted to work with him. If I were to think of his stories in chapters, then the chapter 2 began when he was maybe 18 or 19 years old. You were 18. That's when he met Florence. She was the girls' head counselor at a Jewish summer camp, and he was the athletic director. I don't know, have you seen that picture of him at 18 or 19? There's no shirt on him, you know. He was a jock in those days. But athletic as he was, one of his responsibilities at camp was teaching archery, of all things. This boy from the Orthodox neighborhood of Brownsville had never even seen a bow and arrow, so Florence became his teacher. She also beat him at shooting hoops. And when the time came for Shai to buy her a ring, we're here at the top of a mountain in Bel Air. This is not where he came from. He was dirt poor, and there wasn't any money for a ring. So Shai, always the scholar, entered an essay contest on some arcane Talmudic topic, and he won the prize. It was $100, and that was a lot of money. But the check wouldn't arrive until late summer, so Shai borrowed the money from his mother. He bought the ring. He paid his mother back as soon as he got the check. In the realm of the material, Shai and Florence Zeldin were so poor back in those days, but the spirit was rich. And Florence became Shai's partner in every way. And I have to talk about her because none of this would be here if it weren't for her partnership. Sorry. So when I asked her some years ago, what was that like for her, being his partner? This was the most honest woman in the world. She said, it wasn't easy. But you know, I knew he knew what he was doing. At least, she added, I thought he knew what he was doing. and he proved me right. To which Shai said, you know, Eli, this year is our iron anniversary. There's a Yiddish phrase, he explained, to live with me for so many years, you have to be made out of iron. And they were married for nearly 70 years. Yoshi, you shared a word about Shai's occasional, and Gabe, you did as well. You called them racy, was it? What was the word? What? Spicy, not racy, spicy. So I kind of call them kind of borderline jokes. And yes, Florence sat 3 rows from the back on the aisle. And as Yoshi said, Florence's glance was supposed to tell him to knock it off. But what you didn't say was that he never listened. And she knew that he would never listen because Florence knew this man better than anyone else could know him. And reflecting on what it was like to be his partner as Shai built this congregation, Florence, who was always self-deprecating, she shrugged and she said, to me, she said, Eli, if it wasn't one mishugas, it was another. Mishugas. And in fact, there were many times along the way that there were people who felt that it was exactly that he was crazy. There were naysayers who, and it's been noted, who thought he was crazy to do what he was about to do. And there were those who tried to say no to him. Some of them they resigned a long time ago. Didn't bother him a bit. I'm sorry, that was not in my text, but it didn't. They tried to stop him. Some tried to stop him. It started with, don't buy that property up on the mountaintop. No one from Beverly Hills or the West Side will drive anywhere that close, that far toward the valley. Years later, he would say to me, Eli, do you believe that they didn't want us to move up here? And look at where we are today, right in the geographic center of where LA Jews are living. And yes, he loved being right. Who doesn't love being right? There were those who said, don't build the pool. And there was those who joked around about, and they still do, the shul with the pool, the pew with the view. He loved it when people teased about that, because his vision for Stephen Wise was do anything that will engage Jews, do whatever you need to do to get Jews to come up to this mountain, to come to this temple. And so he wanted to buy buses to bring kids from wherever they were living, no matter the distance from Stephen Wise. There used to be a whole fleet of them. And there were those who said, buses? You want to buy and maintain and insure a fleet of buses to bring kids to school here. There were even some who said no to the starting of a nursery school. No other temple at the time had a nursery school. A day school? We founded the day school in 1978. The Reform movement didn't vote to encourage the establishment of day schools until 1985. 7 years later, this day school was growing by leaps and bounds. He was always far ahead of his time. I remember the convention. The UHC convention was here at the Century Plaza Hotel, and we went, and this was a big controversial vote of does the movement support day schools? So much for the movement. He had voted. He'd voted. I remember those meetings when Shai was directly challenged about the day school. And as the budget grew, and it kept on growing, some would say, we're a temple, we're not a school. My friends, so much of what we see around us today had its opposition. And then when it came to the high school, there were those who were absolutely certain. Not David Smith, he knew, the Milkins knew. But there were those who were absolutely certain that this would be Shai Zeldin's first and greatest failure. Ken Ruby knew that it wouldn't. And Shai's career began as an educator at the JIR in New York and continued to be his core mission when he became the founding dean of HUC in LA. And failure, as you said it, failure was nothing that he never considered the possibility. He was always thinking 3 moves ahead. And if there were risks, he was the last guy you needed to warn about the risks. He understood it all. But here's the point. For those onlookers and for those of us who pretty much can take all of it for granted, this was not easy. And there were some very hard days and nights for him. And Florence told me that there were a few times when he came home at the end of a long day and declared it would have been a lot easier to be a shoe salesman. Can you imagine that? When he made a decision, forget about trying to dissuade him. One of my favorite memories was our weekly staff meetings. He would sit behind his desk surrounded by each of the school directors, by Matuka, by Nate, by me. And we did the business of the temple for that week. And if there was a decision to be made about a program or policy, we'd have a thorough discussion. But once everything had been aired, there was never any doubt about whose word was the last word. And still, once in a while, someone hadn't quite understood that and maybe raised a new point or perhaps an objection. And you would see Shai grit his teeth a little bit. I never saw him get angry, but I saw him grit his teeth. And he would give you a look from over his reading glasses, and he would say, with all due respect. That's all he had to say. With all due respect meant it was time to stop. What was it within the family? You should excuse. Okay, you should excuse, I guess, meant end of conversation. Ultimately, everything that he did on this mountaintop was about reimagining and breathing new life into Judaism and into our people. His vision was extraordinarily exciting, otherwise none of this would have happened. And many of you here shared in that excitement. He convinced you that it was possible and you couldn't help but be inspired. It's why his granddaughter Sivan said yesterday, here's what you said, he had pathological optimism. Maybe that's what it was, maybe that's what it took. I had lunch with him a few years ago when he was in the marina, and I asked him if he could put his finger on the source of his optimism, on the source of his endless hopefulness. I asked him where did it come from, And he pondered the question for a moment. And he said, Eli, what choice is there? What choice is there? Moses stands at the Red Sea and prays. God says, this is not the time for a prayer. Get moving, act. Jump into the water and start swimming. That's how you get to the other side. That's how you make miracles. Throughout the years, Shai was so grateful to those who made miracles with him, but especially the founding generation. Some of those pioneers are here today. I don't know how many are here, but as are his dear friends from Palm Desert, his Stephen Wise East, as you call it. You were precious to him. I know that he would want you to rise. I'm going to ask you to do it. The founding generation and Stephen Wise East, not for applause, just so we can appreciate seeing you. Would you do that? Founders. Larry, you're a founder. You'll raise your hand. Yeah. You've got stories to tell. You have stories to tell. Thank you. It's important that the rest of us see you. All the lay leaders of this congregation, the donors who gave and continue to give unstintingly to build this stream, all of you are part of the story of Shai Zeldin, and he would want me, I know he would want me to make sure you know that. But perhaps most of all, give me a few more minutes. Shai went to a funeral a couple of years ago, and I guess afterwards said to Michael, don't let my funeral be that long. Well, you know, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Most of all, when it came to the creation of miracles, there was Matuka. Shai knew that he could not have realized his vision for our schools without Matuka Benjamin. She was his partner every step of the way from the very first day of Stephen Wise Temple. And Matuka and I reminisced a couple of nights ago, long conversation of memories of how in the early days at Westwood Methodist and at St. Albans, Shai, he was the one who was setting up the chairs and taking them down at the end of the night. I think you guys helped. He's the one who swept the floors so that it would be clean for when the church came back, when the church members came back. He didn't take a salary for the first year because there was no money for a salary. Matuka was there for all of this. And she remembers all of it, and she remembers so much more, knows what it took to build these schools together, how he respected you, Matuka, how completely he trusted you, and how grateful he was for all you gave, and how much he loved you. And Nate, he was proud of you. He never let me hear the end of it. Proud of you for the musical tradition you created here, for the compositions you commissioned, for the concert, as well as for the laughter you brought him. You gave him such joy, nachas. He brought me to Stephen Wise in 1975 when I was 27 years old. I was 27 years old and fresh out of rabbinical school. He hired me. He was my boss. But very quickly, he became so much more than my boss. He was my mentor. I never stopped watching, and I never stopped listening, and I never stopped learning from him. I just remember when I'd visit him in the desert, ask him how he was. It was just a simple, Ailey, this is what 97 looks like. You know, it's like, this is 97. As we both matured on what was always for me a sacred journey, Shai became my dear friend. From boss to mentor to friend. And then miraculously, naturally, as the years went on, he embraced me with such love and said, Ailey, you know you're my family. I know. Late in his life, he continued to reflect on Moses. He spoke from this pulpit on how Moses had led his people through the sea and across the wilderness, but was not allowed to fulfill his dream of entering the promised land with them. From this bema, he expressed enormous, heartfelt gratitude for having been blessed even beyond Moses. He was blessed, he said, to actually enter the promised land, to fulfill every one of his dreams. Can there be, is it possible that there could be any greater blessing than this life? Michael and Joe, grandchildren. We began with you generously sharing your reflections and memories, precious, with us. To some of the people in this sanctuary, Shai Zeldin was a giant. It's the word that people have come up to me and they've used it. He was a giant. But it was only with you that he could be dad. Only with you that he could be Grandpa Shai. Nobody else. Even those who called him that. It was you. That's why you were his greatest blessing. Yesterday afternoon, when we gathered in Sivan and Igor's living room, our only agenda was to remember, because ultimately, more than any bricks and mortar, memory is what remains. You, the descendants of the master storyteller, were telling his story and yours. Know Joel and Michael, how proud he was of you, his sons, how he treasured and respected and loved you far more than what he could ever have spoken. Know, Karen, that you were always, always, always his treasured daughter. Know, Terry, that he loved the wholeness and the peace that you brought into Michael's life. Know, Leah, that he always held you as family. Everyone in this sanctuary for whom he was rabbi, teacher, friend has a Shai story. Many of them are deeply personal stories. All of them are life-affirming, and some of them are life-transforming. But after all of the stories of those gathered here today, and after all the praise and gratitude for you, Shai, for what you created on this mountaintop, for all of us and for the Jewish people, we know that what remains most precious to you was your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. It's your stories that mattered most to him. And one final memory, one final thought. Yesterday, as we adults talked, there was this joyful noise. There was the chatter and the laughter of the 7 great-grandchildren. playing in the background, weaving seamlessly in and out and around their parents and grandparents who were immersed in the gift of remembering. They were the ones, it's been said, that Shai asked about the most. Eitan, Ilana, Alina, Liam, Stav, Evan, and Ido. Maybe because he knew that they were his future, his immortality. Everything those little ones did and said brought him, I think, an entirely new, a new kind of boundless joy. We've gathered here, this great community, to bid our loving and grateful farewell to our Rabbi Isaiah Zeldin. But more than anyone, your dad, your Grandpa Shai, belongs to you, and we're just grateful that you shared him. May the soul of Harav Yeshayahu ben Moshe Ephraim ve'Esther be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. Yehi zichro baruch. May his memory remain always an abiding blessing.
El Mali Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashechinah במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת הרב ישעיהו Ben Moshe Ephraim Vester Moreinu Harav Shehalach Leolamo Began Eden Tehei menuchato Ana bal harachamim Hastireu beseiter genavav Leolamim Utzror bitzror achaim Et nishmato Adonai Unachalato V'yanuach b'shalom V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, the soul of Rabbi Isaiah Zeldin, Yeshayahu ben Moshe Ephraim Esther, who is gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. Let us say, Amen. We'll conclude with the singing of a song composed by Naomi Shemer that Rabbi Zeldin especially loved, Lu Yehi, a song of hope, a song about a future that will be better, more peaceful, more whole, more shalom.
עוד יש מפרש לבן באופק מול ענן שחור כבד כל שנבקש לו יהי ואם בחלונות הערב אור נרותך רועד כל שנבקש לו יהי
And still the white sail in the distance shines against the blackest cloud. Kol shenevakesh lu yehi. And through the window of the evening flickers festive light so proud. Kol shenevakesh lu yehi.
And suddenly, and from the darkness, up above a star will shine. Kol shenevakesh lu yehi.
Please grant us strength and grant us wisdom, love and peace in our own time. Kol shenevakesh lu yehi. Lu yehi, lu yehi, ana lu yehi. Kol shenevakesh lu yehi. Lu yehi, lu yehi, ana lu yehi. Kol shenevakesh lu yehi. Kol shenevakesh lu yehi.
Kol shenevakesh.
Kol shenevakesh. Kol shenevakesh. Lu
In a moment, we'll accompany the casket to Eden Cemetery. I want to ask everybody to please allow the family to follow the casket along with the clergy out before exiting, and to give the family the opportunity to get to their cars. And then we'll all go together to Eden. This evening there will be a meal of consolation hosted at the temple beginning at 7 p.m. Everybody's invited to come and to eat with one another. We can share memories of Rabbi Zeldin. And then at 8 o'clock this evening, there will be a minyan and an opportunity to say Mourner's Kaddish together. I want to invite the casket bearers to come forward. I want to ask everybody to please rise. Sivan Zakai, Igor Zakai, Sasha Zeldin, Dustin Clark, Oren Kroll Zeldin, Noga Furstenberg, Gabe Zeldin, and Noam Kroll Zeldin.